They say that money corrupts, with there being only a select few people who have been able to increase their net worth past the billion mark while still retaining their humanity. Without any semblance of a doubt, Michael Bloomberg is one of those people, and has for years now used his incredible bank account to try and make the world a better place. But what does someone like Michael Bloomberg spend his money on, and what do experts estimate his net worth to be nowadays anyway? Well, whether you're a fan of the billionaire philanthropist or just want to know as much as possible about the former mayor of New York City, stay right where you are, as we're about to explore the net worth and lifestyle of the one and only Michael Bloomberg. So strap yourselves in and get ready for an intriguing ride, as things are about to get interesting. But before we get into it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe with the notifications turned on so you don't miss out on any of the new videos we post. A little more about Michael. Michael Rubens Bloomberg was born in Brighton, Massachusetts on the 14th of February 1942, making him 79 years old at the moment. He had a pretty comfortable early childhood and was brought up by his mother, Charlotte Bloomberg, and father, William Henry Bloomberg, who worked as a bookkeeper for a local dairy company and became quite famous for his financial skills. In fact, the Bloomberg Center at Harvard Business School was named in his honor after he had passed. It must also be said that Michael was brought up in a primarily Jewish household, with both him and the remainder of his extended family coming from a long line of Polish and Lithuanian Jewish people. His family moved from Brighton when he was only 2 years of age and found themselves in Brookline a few towns over. Another 2 years later, and they decided to settle in Boston suburb of Medford, Massachusetts, which is where Michael lived until he graduated from college. Speaking of, after becoming an Eagle Scout and graduating from Medford High School in 1960, Michael went on to attend Johns Hopkins University. He has quite a rich history with the college, where he joined the Phi Kappa Psi fraternity, but ended up designing the Blue Jay costume worn by the university's mascot. In 1964, he graduated from Johns Hopkins with a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering. He then found himself at Harvard Business School, where he obtained a Master of Business Administration degree. Suffice it to say, the man had quite a bit of education under his belt before moving on to bigger things. After working for Salomon Brothers for a few years, Michael became a general partner of the firm in 1973. For those of you who don't know, Salomon Brothers was a large Wall Street investment bank, where he headed both equity training and systems development. A few years later, and the Fibro Corporation went on to buy Salomon Brothers, thus firing Bloomberg and paying him around $10 million for his equity in the firm. Using the money he had acquired from this purchase and having a background in computerized financial systems, Michael decided to incorporate a data services company named Innovative Market Systems, otherwise known as IMS. The company became pretty popular by selling computerized computer terminals, which delivered real-time market data, financial calculations, and other forms of information pertinent to those on Wall Street. The company then renamed itself to Bloomberg L.P., from which a number of other companies grew, such as Bloomberg News and Bloomberg Radio. And although the company was considered to be incredibly lucrative for Michael, many have criticized it for how it ran in the 1980s and 90s, which has been compared to the likes of a fraternity. The men of the business would often brag about their sexual exploits, with the company even being sued by female employees a grand total of 4 times within this period. Bloomberg himself was often criticized as being pretty sexist and misogynistic, but this didn't stop him from becoming one of the wealthiest men in the world. This wasn't the end for Michael Bloomberg though, who was voted in as the mayor of New York City back in 2002 on the platform of Republican principles. Although he struggled with his approval rating over the first year or so, the public slowly but surely began to like him, which led to him being re-elected in 2005 and again in 2009. Some of his most prominent changes came in the form of tackling public education reform, as well as breaking with tradition by implementing an open floor planning government to promote both accountability and accessibility. This resulted in the city's $6 billion budget deficit being turned into a $3 billion surplus, making him one of the greatest mayors that New York City had ever seen, saving countless jobs while he was in office, and generally making the lives of everyone living in the city much better. That being said, he did have his fair share of controversies throughout his time as mayor. A great example of this was his racially based expansion of the New York City Police Department's stop and frisky policy. This saw a 6-fold increase in documented stops, which the U.S. federal court later ruled to be a violation of citizens' lives under the 4th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. His administration also oversaw a controversial program that surveyed a number of U.S. Muslim communities after the September 11th attacks. Since this surveillance program was based on nothing more than factors such as race, language, and religion, the program was disbanded in 2014. But after turning to the Democratic Party, Bloomberg decided to take a run at the presidency, later ending his campaign by endorsing the current president of the United States, Joe Biden. Michael's net worth. Michael Bloomberg might have done some controversial things throughout his time which, especially in today's climate, strike a bit of a nerve. That being said, none of this controversy made a dent in his reputation as a brilliant businessman and downright great mayor. He not only got rid of the massive deficit of the city, but turned it into a useful surplus, which is what he has done with his personal life as well. In fact, experts have estimated that Bloomberg's net worth to be at the moment is around $59 billion, making him one of the richest people in the world. So, what does someone like Bloomberg spend his money on? Number 1. His collection of homes. When you're a man of wealth, it goes without saying that you're going to have quite a few pieces of immovable property in your disposal. This is especially clear when it comes to someone like Michael, who considers himself to be a savvy businessman and a maker of intelligent investment decisions. Buying a piece of immovable property is always smart, as it has little to no risk of depreciating over the years. In fact, buyers often stand to make quite a bit of money off of the flipping of the home a short while later. In other words, it shouldn't surprise you that Michael has quite a few homes attached to his name. When Michael first left the office of mayor in 2013, he disclosed that his primary residence was Beaux Arts Mansion on East 79th Street in New York City. This mansion was reported by sources to have been bought for an amount of $3.5 million in 1986, which he then renovated for an amount of $1.7 million in 2013. Take one look at this home after renovations and you'll see why it is valued in the tens of millions at the moment. The 5-story townhouse is so large that it even has an elevator for those days when you just don't feel like taking the stairs. Suffice it to say, Bloomberg lives a life of luxury when he's in the city. Bloomberg has also bought 5 of the 6 condos in the apartment complex next door, which he apparently wants to subsume into his current mansion to provide more space for himself and his children when they come to visit. Considering that he paid around $14 million for just one of these condos, we can't even imagine what the entirety of the mansion is going to be worth when everything is finished. He has another condo in the city which he bought for around $3.8 million in the year 2000. Surprisingly enough, this condo can be found in the infamous Trump building. Lastly, he owns another Beaux Arts mansion on 78th Street, which is where his philanthropic organization runs from. According to sources, this piece of property, which was picked up in 2006 for a grand total of $45 million, which he apparently paid in full with the use of a single check. Michael Bloomberg also owns a 22,000 square foot estate in the Hamptons, which he purchased for $20 million in 2011, a 33-acre estate in North Salem for $4.55 million, a $25 million mansion in London, England, and a number of other apartments spread across the world. It must also be said that the man owns vacation homes in Bermuda, Vail, and Florida, which brings his total amount spent on immovable property to be in the hundreds of millions. Number 2. His campaign. Bloomberg had an incredible stint as mayor of New York City, but found himself unable to use this platform of his to make a big enough name for himself outside of his home state. This resulted in one of the worst presidential campaigns in recent history, with Bloomberg spending over $1 billion on the short-lived race. According to sources, Michael went ahead and spent about $23 million on average, securing each delegate that he essentially won over. A quarter of the total amount spent was directed towards the running of a flood of advertisements in his favor, which looked to have the opposite effect that he wanted them to have. Sources also suggest that Bloomberg brought on some of the best campaign advisors and staffers in the history of American politics by providing them with salaries of almost double the other campaigns, free meals and alcohol, iPhone 11s, as well as furnished apartments on Manhattan's East Upper Side. If you take the length of his campaign into account, it turns out that the hopeful politician spent around $5.6 million per day until finally conceding to Joe Biden. Number 3. His philanthropy. Being a fairly terrible person for most of his personal life, Michael Bloomberg made sure to always donate towards great causes. In effect, he established what is now referred to as Bloomberg Philanthropies, which describes itself as an organization that works to ensure better and longer lives for the greater number of people in the world. In 2019 alone, Michael ended up donating around $3.3 billion to charitable causes, which is more than any other American has ever donated. Considering how this was only a single year, there's no telling just how much he has given over his long life. But what do you think of the life and times of Michael Bloomberg? Feel free to let us know in the comment section down below.